We deal with our mind from morning till evening. It can be our best friend or worst enemy.
Today, we're going to go deep inside, excavating our own minds. Who are we as humans? What is the nature of consciousness? What is that value system that makes us unique and something worth hanging on to in an era when we're ready to pass the baton on to another species altogether? To discuss that, we have an amazing polymathic Renaissance man, Matthieu Ricard. Matthieu is a Buddhist monk. He is also a cell geneticist from the Pasteur Institute many years ago, but the DNA remains. He's also a photographer that has been praised by Henri Cartier-Bresson. He is the advisor to the Dalai Lama. He runs the Karuna Shechen, which is Compassion in Action. And he's been a bridge between Eastern knowledge systems and Western science for many years, helping all worlds come together to a space of understanding. And the beauty of it is none of these identities is who Matthieu Ricard is. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Matthieu Ricard on stage. Matthieu, thank you so much for coming.
Pleasure.
And thank you for being here all of yesterday. It was very special to see you sitting there, listening to everything that was being said. So, Matthieu, I know that you are very keen to speak about compassion and the nature of altruism and the revolution that's possible, and I think that's a really important subject to speak about. But before that, I wanted to really establish some of the, principles of what the self is and what the reality of nature is, for us to be able to understand how compassion and altruism can, play out in that realm. So many years ago, when you left your life in France and you went and joined the, monastery in Darjeeling, you met with your father, who was a French intellectual, and you had this dialogue with him, which became the book, The Monk and the Philosopher. And you, argued over the different processes, the science of the mind in the tradition of Buddhism and science of the mind in the realm of Western empiricism. So if you were to distill 2 or 3 things that, really emerged from that dialogue with your father, what would it be?
Well, I think it's not to underestimate the power of transformation of mind, because basically our control of the outer world is limited, is ephemeral, and it's often illusory. And of course, it is essential to improve the world. There's no question that we should remedy to extreme poverty. We should bring education. We should empower women. All that's absolutely necessary. But it is kind of a drama to underestimate the importance of the way our mind works. We deal with our mind from morning till evening. It can be our best friend or worst enemy. It has the power to override outer circumstances. We can be miserable in a little paradise, and we can remain our inner strength, compassion, and joy of being alive, even in face of adverse circumstances. So, in a way, if we can transform the way our mind works, we transform our worlds. My dear friend Anil said yesterday, said that we don't perceive reality as it is, we perceive reality as it is. Evolution equipped us to perceive it as it is useful for us to survive. And it's very hard to imagine how the bat sees the world. There's been a lot of philosophical question about that. I can hardly, at 79, I can hardly walk without falling down, but a bat can fly in the dark. But if a bat look at the big storm on the ocean one day, and An ocean is like a mirror the next day. How the bat relates the two, I don't know. So everyone's world is, our world is the way the mind perceives the world. So how can we know reality? There's many of those questions. But the main point is that if the way our mind works is the ultimate thing that transform outer circumstances in happiness or misery, then it seems important to do something about our mind.
Right. Matthieu, I just want to emphasize this because when one first encounters it, like I was saying to Anil yesterday, it is a difficult concept to understand. That what do we mean by saying that nature doesn't exist as is and that it's something that we are actively creating? It's a very powerful idea because it makes you realize that, that everything isn't immutable, that it is not inevitable, it is something that we are creating out of our own minds. So at the heart of that is the idea of the self, and Buddhism has a very profound and important idea of the self. So help people understand that relation between nature and the self.
So at first, creating is a big word.
Yes.
I think the fact is that there is a whole set of, everything is interrelated and interdependent. So we speak in Buddhism of interdependent production. It's all the works of relations between things. So when a particular type of consciousness, like a human consciousness, or a bat consciousness, or the consciousness of an ant, to some extent, comes in the face of a certain thing that may be not fully determined by itself, there's a crystallization of a particular way of seeing the world. So we're not creating things. Something happened in this interaction that we perceive the world in a certain way. So now the self, of course, is in Hinduism, the Atman is the ultimate sort of reality. In many religions, we speak of the soul. Buddhism is a specialist of sort of decomposing the self.
Decomposing the self.
Well, I mean, seeing that it is a convenient illusion which has absolutely no real foundation. We have been mystified by the self for lifetimes and lifetimes according to Buddhism. And the analysis is very simple, basically. We have the feeling, I have the feeling that there was this little boy, that this old monk, and somehow that's me that traveled all the way. So what this means is there is an history, the dynamic flow in constant transformation. That we may call that the person, and that's all fine. Then there's the sense of I. I wake up in the morning, I woke up this morning, I feel fine. Or I feel hungry, or I feel cold. That's okay. But then we superimpose an idea of a concept, of a self.
Superimpose it.
Yes, that's the heart of myself, the core. This has consequences. Because if it is the core of my being, the most precious thing, then I must protect it. I must do everything to fend off everything that threatens that self. I must take everything that pleases that self. So then we start dividing the world, me and the world, me and others. So attraction, repulsion. What comes from that? Animosity, craving, pride, jealousy, lack of discernment, confusion, ignorance, delusion, suffering. So if it was just a philosophical idea, no problem. So what is in a simple way, the Buddhist analysis of them? Say, okay, you think you have a self, so where it is? Oh, it's somewhere here. Okay, where? In your heart? No. In the body? So where in the body? The whole body? So suppose I lose my legs. Well, I lost my leg, it's terrible, but I still have a self. So now they say, you push me. So that's the body. You hurt my feelings. That's the feeling. Now this is my feeling. So there's an owner where it is. So is it in the mind? The past thoughts are gone. The future thought not yet born. The present is ungraspable. So where is that self? So it's an illusion.
I'm sorry to rush you on this, Matthieu, but yes, there would be one frontier. I think that is really the heart of the debate. Yes, it's not your limbs, it's not your particular organs, but definitely there's something that happens when integrated systems come together and there's a kind of processing of information that does give that illusion of the self, because when you're in a coma, your body continues to function, but your sense of I-ness, your sense of Matthieu Ricard would disappear, you know? So I think that lies at the heated debate around consciousness, whether it is just an information processing system, is it the spiritual construct of the Vedanta, is it the illusion of Buddhism? You know, that's going to be unless you want
to give you a last example.
Yes.
No, we call the Ganges, fine. Why? It is a continuum. It is different from the Yamuna River, but there's not a little head that comes up and says, don't forget, I am the Ganges, the real one, the core, the heart of the Ganges. So consciousness is a dynamic stream in constant transformation, and that it is fine. Now to assign something else is a fabrication of the mind, but there's no problem. It's a convenient illusion. We need that to function. You know, called Shona.
You know, when I was reading your work and also precepts of Buddhism, I think for me at least what got distilled as something to take away as very enabling is the idea of change. You know, the fact that the self is not you know, whether it's illusion, whether it's not, we don't know, but it's definitely not immutable. And you know, that very powerful idea at the heart of your work is that it can change because you are interacting with that perception of yourself, you're interacting with your reality and helping generate it, so you can shift it, you can remove yourself from it, change it. That was a very powerful message. I just wanted to come back to what I asked you about the dialogue with your father. Was he, you know, did he sort of come around to your way of thinking? And it's interesting, yesterday when there was this discussion about reality, that the intuitions of the Eastern systems is being borne out by science, you know, absolutely about the nature of reality. Anil Seth and others are neuroscientists. They're doing, you know, experiments which show that the conception of the self and reality in Buddhism and the Vedanta are being borne out by science. So did your father come around to thinking like you?
No, you know, I mean, I don't know if it's worth spending time on that, but my father had said the Greek had 3 questions. What can I know? How can I lead my life? And how can I govern the city? So he said democracy is supposed to have answered how to govern the nation. Science answers most of the questions. What can I know? But how to lead my life, according to my father, modern philosopher, had given up that to make big intellectual construct that is, you know, not so very useful. So he felt that Buddhism has something to contribute, but he didn't adhere to the other fundamental idea of Buddhism, but that was fine. So I don't know if that book was the beginning of an opportunity. That's many years now. I could start humanitarian projects. Now we're helping 500,000 people.
Would you speak a little closer, please?
And in Nepal. Or at the beginning of my trouble, because I started to be taken in a maelstrom instead of staying quiet in my hermitage. So I don't regret that, but certainly it made a sudden change that I didn't expect.
So I just want to share with the audience that, you know, when Matthieu now starts to speak about compassion and altruism, apart from the fact that he's a very venerated Buddhist monk, there's also science that backs it. And Matthieu has been part of many neuroscientific experiments with Richard Davidson's lab in the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And an epithet has been attached to him, which he shies away from, and it's an embarrassing media one. But Matthieu has been called the happiest man alive on the planet because when the experiment was done with 250 sensors on his brain, Matthieu hit it out of the park. You know, they found that his gamma rays was outside all the graphs that were possible. You know, so while everybody came in at a median of the best ones, happiest ones, most aware ones were at minus 0.3. He was at minus 0.45, you know. He was like at the end of the axis where you needed a kind of intergalactic thing to look for it, you know. So his gamma rays is like really out there on his left cortex.
May I slightly modulate
Tone
that?
it down, yes.
First of all, it was nothing to do with happiness, although, of course, compassion and altruism is probably the main factor for genuine happiness. And that's definitely not the only one. There was 20 subjects who had basically, I was the first one in time, so that was make little noise. But the good thing is it's not about me as somebody, special. It is anyone who had undergone between 10,000 or 50,000 hours of, they were not doing that to make a great performance, but just because they were engaged in a spiritual process. They all have very similar result. And so yes, the intensity of the gamma wave change was not been reported previously in neuroscience. Then there was a documentary from Australian television, and they say at the end, oh, maybe this is the happiest person of the world. And then it was forgotten for some years, and then one day, a British newspaper, The Independent, at the title page and the front page, we found the happiest person in the world, and from then it was completely out of control. I tried to make many disclaimers that there's no way to know the level of happiness of 8 billion human beings. You just have to think for 5 seconds. That we're not measuring happiness, but anyway.
Yeah, I was just giving you media credentials.
I guess I will die with that. And, yes. It's better than to be called the unhappiest person in the world.
That's true. Yesterday, when Heino Falke was talking about discovering that image of the black hole and his entire team breaking into groups to, cross-check their confirmation biases, I want to say that Matthieu has repeatedly been saying this, that only a few people were tested in that lab. So it's really, like you said, there's no way of knowing how happy other people are.
I was not even the best afterwards, after a few subjects.
Right.
Anyway,
but
the point is that, we are not born learning how to read and write, how to play the music, how to do sport performance, as we heard yesterday, this extraordinary way of enhancing our physical capacities. But somehow, we think that, when it comes to fundamental human qualities, like attention, compassion, resilience, inner freedom, inner peace, well, that's it. I'm a mixture of quality, of light and shadows, take it or leave it, I have to accept myself. Why? It's like giving up the race before crossing the starting line. It will be a mystery that those basic qualities are the only thing that's fixed somehow, like grave in stone. What is it? We cannot all become Olympic champion, or concert pianists, but there's a big margin. So every of those qualities are skills that can be enhanced to an optimal state by training and meditation. People think is sitting under a mango tree with an incense stick. It's really familiarizing yourself with a better understanding of how the mind works and cultivating. The bhavana in Sanskrit means to cultivate some qualities. So we can cultivate those skills, and all together, they can make something that we can call sukha, or sort of a flourishing or well-being.
Yes. You've said that the Buddhism is a science of the mind, the contemplative life. And there's 2,500 years of it. So when I was talking about that experiment, it was in a way of kind of validating it from Western empiricism as well, that there is a brain plasticity. And when you do those exercises of meditation, we'll be listening to Adam Ghazali, who's one of the foremost scientists of brain plasticity, that it actually transforms the physiology of your brain, and that's what was borne out. So in that, Matthieu, you've been making a distinction between compassion and empathy. So when even when you went away from the monastery to look after an ailing family member, and you were going back into retreat, you asked the Dalai Lama what you should focus on, and he said, meditate on compassion, meditate on compassion, meditate on compassion. So help us understand this distinction between compassion and empathy, and how do you meditate on compassion?
In the beginning, I was not very familiar with the concept, and there's no direct word in Tibetan. So I was talking with my friend Paul Ekman, which is a great psychologist on emotion. And he said, when you feel compassion, do you suffer with the person? Do you suffer yourself? So that's a form of empathy. Well, there's two kinds of empathy, briefly. There is affective empathy, emotional empathy. You come here with a big smile, and before I start, I feel smiling. So it's not contagion, but I smile because I smile, you smile, and I know it. Now, one form of empathy which often we are confronted with, and first of all, empathy is an extraordinary quality. Franz de Waal wrote a book on the age of empathy. We herited to evolution. It allows us to know the state of the other. So affective empathy, if you suffer, I truly suffer. And Tanya Singer, with whom I work a lot, showed that the same networks in the brain of suffering that actually if you suffer from the suffering of others. Now, and then there's a cognitive empathy, which is to try to know what people think without feeling it. And that's psychopaths are very good at cognitive empathy, but they have no affective empathy. So now, I went to Tanya Singer's lab, and she was the specialist of empathy, one of the great specialists. And she said, okay, let's do what you do normally. So I did it on compassion. And she said, what are you doing? It's not the same as we see usually. It was real-time fMRI. I said, doing compassion. So let's come out, we must discuss. And so I explained, and he said, can you just do empathy, resonate with suffering of others? So I had just seen the night before a documentary on Romanian orphans with incredibly sad condition. So I said, okay, I'll try. So I did, 45 minutes of in, out, that's what we do. Neutral state, then empathy, resonating with the suffering. Within 45 minutes, I got a burnout. And then she said, would you like to come out? Or shall we shift to compassion? I said, please, I need to shift to compassion now. I don't care. I can stay 5 hours in the fMRI. It's okay. So then when I shifted to compassion, it was like breaking a dam. Every atom of suffering was filled with atom of love. And the brain was a completely different pattern. So from there, we started the research. And we showed that it's quite different. Empathy is the effect, in the case of suffering, the effect that the suffering of others has on you. So of course, if you are a social worker, a medical nurse or something, and you are empathetic, then day after day, the patient either they cure or they die, but you don't suffer your whole life. But if day after day you see children with cancer and all that, it's too much. So you have burnout. So then we found that compassion is directed towards others. Like the doctor on the battlefield is not going to cry when you see a wounded person. 24 hours he will operate. So we found that compassion was the antidote to burnout. And so people speak of compassion fatigue, and we show that it is empathy fatigue. Empathy left on its own is like a water pump without water.
Like a sponge.
It burns. So we need the water of loving kindness. And I met some nurse who say, I feel shy to tell my colleagues, but I feel so much love and joy to take care of them. I say, please continue. That's the way. So normally, doctors are advised, or the social workers, to create a distance, to protect themselves emotionally. But that's not ideal. They can become very cold. So the real answer is cultivate compassion, loving kindness, good heart. And then empathy will. So we show that also doing experiments. Tanya Singer showed that you can burn out very easily if you just practice empathy alone.
So, this is a very powerful distinction. And like you said, that compassion can be built like a muscle. And prior to that is to, get that freedom about understanding yourself, that it is not so implicated in the reality that is there. And I know you've been challenged by others in the past to say, if you're living in a monastery or you're well off, you're in happy circumstances, then it's very easy to be able to be compassionate or philanthropic. But what if you were in the midst of war, or you're in the midst of very adverse situations, Can you still have that equanimity and equipoise? And can compassion then operate in those places where you yourself are in a very adverse circumstance?
At my age, I have been faced with many circumstances. I went to Tibet. We were in an area of earthquake. We worked tirelessly to take people out of the rubble. We brought 20 trucks of helps. I have seen a lot of suffering. I've lived in India most of my life and Nepal. And about being well off, sorry, that's not the case, because I gave 100% of all my royalties to start the humanitarian work we do with Karuna. So
Yeah.
I live easily with $100 a month, that's fine. Once I met in Delhi airport, someone said, there's a book called The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. He said, did you sell your Ferrari? Are you the monk who sold his Ferrari? I said, I didn't sell mine yet. So basically, my favorite mantra is, I need nothing, I need nothing. And one of my friends, a Jesuit father who works in South India, he wrote a book, What is not given is lost.
No, I wasn't asking whether you possessed wealth or not, or your BMW. Let's not give Ferrari a pitch here, But I wasn't really asking about that. I was saying that people often ask that, as a monk, you've also kind of retreated from the whirlwind of life. You're not implicated in, the tug and pull of life.
So once I did an interview in England with the BBC and said, well, that's quite selfish to stay in retreat and all this. You don't have to deal, you don't have to pay tax, and you don't have to do this and that. I said, look.
I'm glad the BBC thinks the only adverse thing is to pay tax,
Maybe. So I said, look, when you build a hospital, the cement work, the electricity, the pipes, don't help anyone. So you could say, oh, no, don't build a hospital, you operate to surgery in the street. It's urgent now. Of course, you should do emergency work. But when the hospital is ready, it's so much useful. So the idea is in the ordinary world, in the confusion of the daily activities, distraction, mundane concern about gain and loss, pleasure and pain, fame and obscurity, we are too weak in a way to become strong enough to be at the service of others. So if you want to start an NGO, the best advice I would tell you is first spend time becoming a better human being so you can serve others better. So that's what we do in the Hermitage. That's not waste of time.
No, this is, again, it's those kind of eureka moments in your brain that even in Buddhism, it's kind of works in contrarian impulses that to understand how to decompose the idea of the self, you first have to stabilize the idea of the self, to recognize it and then to dismantle it, So
it's possible. But main thing is we need to train this altruism and compassion so that we can really be. What happens in many cases, we set about helping others, look at so many organizations, and then what happens? Human shortcomings, could be corruption, could be clashes of egos. So many NGOs collapse because of internal matters, not the outer. So, of course, a training that gives you the resilience to accomplish your goal, not try to make everyone perfect on the way. That's the work of the Buddha, not my work. I want to build a school, I want to build a clinic, so that's the thing. Yeah. So we need a kind of, being stable, not be careful, not mind too much if people, don't behave well and so forth, because you have a clear goal of helping others. And so you have the inner strength. And one of our weaknesses, why people speak so much of vulnerability, because we are so much self-centered. Me all day long, we feel so vulnerable because everything is a threat to that me or a possible advantage to that me. If you get rid of that me, then you're so open because you don't worry whether what people tell about you or not tell about you, and then you can be open, look at the world and try to be ready to help others.
Right. So I just want to come to the idea of altruism, and we'll have to wrap up soon, is that you've been speaking of altruism as a revolution. And again, engaging with your work, to me, it was a big discovery to see that, one, the interdependence of the world is something that lies at the heart of your, advocating for altruism. But you also, again, scientifically showed that even evolution, which we've been taught that it's a selfish gene, but evolution has showed that even altruism also lies at the heart of evolution itself. So do talk to the audience about that finding.
Well, there is a book by Martin Novak, for instance, called Super Cooperator, and he shows very clearly that cooperation, of course there's a struggle for life, but we can struggle together. And that cooperation has been much more creative throughout evolution to come to what we are, social animals. And so that's very important. But the main point is if you want to put around the same table social workers who try to help a woman in an impoverished area of India to feed their kids next week, then someone who deals with economy, investment, political deciders, social workers, scientists of the environment, with everyone think they are pained because they tell us to do things that nobody is ready to do. And they are depressed because they know what's going to happen and no politician listen. So suppose, except a few nutcases, we all want to build a better world. And we sit around the table. We need a common concept to unite our thinking. Selfishness will not do the job. No, I'm a fan of Groucho Marx. He's my favorite Marxist. He said, why should I care for future generations? What did they do for me? But listen, I heard an American billionaire, I'm not going to name it, saying on Fox News about the rise of the ocean, I find absurd to change my behavior now for something happening in 100 years. So there's the serious version of Groucho Marx. So the only concept, pragmatic, that is having more consideration for others. If you do that, you will take care of the mother who needs to feed her kids. You will take care of poverty in the midst of plenty. You will take care of the commons, the environment, nature, the quality of the air, democracy, advancements of science, all that you need to step out of your personal interest. You will take care of the midterm, of flourishing in life. Now, if we don't flourish in life, a nation that is the most powerful and the richest, where everyone is miserable, what's the point? So we need to flourish. And we need to care for future generations. Otherwise, they will say, you knew and you did nothing. So that's the ultimate challenge to altruism. But that's the only concept that can reconcile the 3-time scale and help us to build a better world.
So, you know, Matthieu, we'll have to wrap up soon, but I just wanted to again reinforce strands of what you're saying. One is that this interdependence, and yesterday when Rita Banerjee was talking about the philosophy of the forest, it was to remind both about the collaboration, the interdependence, that the truth of nature is that everything really is interdependent, and we are very much part of nature and living in it. So that, and, you know, to double back down on altruism, because, you know, when it is positioned as a chivalric activity, you know, I'm not sure how many people are inspired to do it, because after a while you lose the muscle for it, you know, and you want to go back to eating cake. So, but when you know that even in evolution, the gene expresses itself, yes, as a desire to perpetuate itself, but it was fascinating to discover that the gene also expresses itself in a sense of community, and that, you know, when there's a predator, the one lone chimpanzee that'll, you know, sort of give an alarm call that the leopard is coming, or, you know, a bird that does it, very often they're the ones that might get eaten up, but they do it to protect the community, because then the gene will continue to transfer.
It's not only that. You know, the selfish gene is everything you do is to propagate your genes, or those related to you, your kins and everything. This is just not true. There are plenty of people who do things for people who are completely unrelated to them. So genes don't have intentions, that's all. Altruism is about an intention to benefit others and remove suffering. Genes is no more conscious of that than this class. So this doesn't make any sense, frankly speaking.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matthieu. Matthieu is again in that interstice between bringing the intuitions and deep meditative, contemplative science of the mind from the Buddhist tradition into the laboratories, proving again and again the efficacies of this, and yet to remember that ultimately, like Heino Falke was saying, that there is a limit to even human knowledge and empiricism, and there's something that lies beyond. And you know, these are the practitioners that are living in that realm of the beyond, and yet making it intelligible for the rest of us to engage with it. So,
one last word.
Yes.
We are in India. We work in India with Karuna session, so I think it would be wonderful if Indians help us to help Indians. So yes. You're most welcome.
Thank you very much, Matthieu, for being with us. Thank you so much.